CSS Grid layout is not just one property, it is a complete module. So there are some concepts that you need to understand. The first thing you need to understand is the grid container. So the grid container is simply created by giving to any element a value of grid to its display property. For instance, here in my HTML document, I have a container. If you go to CSS and write the selector that targets that specific container, and within its declaration block, I type in display, then grid, now this container has become a grid container. Then all the immediate children of this container are grid items. So this element is a grid item, this element is a grid item, and also this one is a grid item. But sub-items are not considered as grid items. Only the immediate children are grid items. Making the difference between the grid container and the grid item is important. Throughout this course, you will be learning some properties that you can set on the grid container, but if you use them on the grid item, they will have no effects, and some other properties that work only on the grid item. So let's repeat it again. A grid container is simply created by giving a value of grid to the display property. So here when we typed in this rule, this container has become a grid container and all of its immediate children are grid items. Now let's move to the next concept you need to understand. Grid line. So the dividing lines that make up the structure of the grid are called grid lines. These grid lines can be either vertical or horizontal. If they are vertical, they are called column grid lines. And if they are horizontal, they are called row grid lines. So in our example, these lines are column grid lines and these lines are row grid lines. Then the space between two adjacent grid lines is called grid track. You can think of them as columns or rows of the grid. So here in our example, this is considered a grid track and this one is also considered a grid track. Then you have the grid cell. It is the space between two adjacent row and two adjacent column grid lines. In our example, this is considered to be a grid cell. This one is also considered a grid cell. And finally, we have the grid area, which is the total space surrounded by 4 grid lines. The grid area can contain any number of grid cells. So in our example, this is a grid area and this one is also considered a grid area. So let's see again what you need to remember. You have the grid container, the grid item, the grid line, the grid track, the grid cell, and the grid area. Throughout this course, I'll be using these terms. And in the next video, you will create your first grid. See you soon.